Good morning. Welcome to today's program, Success Searching Plainfield's Historical Newspapers. I'm Jane Thoner, genealogy librarian at the local History, Genealogy, and Special Collections Department at Plainfield Public Library. Today, I'll show you how to use our digitized local historical newspapers. This is the second of a series of genealogy resource programs. The local history department is supported by funding from a general operating support grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, a division of the Department of State, a 2021 Hart History, Education, Arts Reaching Thousands grant from the Union County Board of County Commissioners, and the Plainfield Foundation. This program is being recorded and will be available for later viewing via the library's YouTube channel. Please enter your questions into the Q&A section so I can answer them at the end of the presentation. In the Local History, Genealogy, and Special Collections Department, we're very happy to have our collection of local historical newspapers. They're a great resource to us and to the researchers who visit our website to investigate their families and historical events. But it seems like every newspaper search system is a little different. So are the newspapers. These are some tips for investigating the historical newspapers available from Plainfield Public Library using DigiFind It, which is what we use to work with this collection of newspapers. Before we start, the settings on your home computer may be different from those we have at the library. That can affect how the newspaper issues open on your computer and whether you have to make a second search within hits that you get. Our demonstration is made with Internet Explorer, which is the recommended browser for these newspapers, and we use Adobe Acrobat Reader, which is a free download available through our website if you don't already have it. We're going to start on the library's homepage, plainfieldlibrary.info, and navigate to the newspapers by clicking on the Department's drop-down menu and choosing Collections Index. Newspapers are the fifth option here. We'll click on the icon on the left to learn more about all of the local periodicals available at the library. This includes some which are not digitized. There are three lists here. The first is an alphabetical list by title, which gives the time spans covered. The Central New Jersey Times is the first paper alphabetically, and you can see that it was a weekly paper. We have it from September 1868 to the end of 1880, and that's all searchable through our website. There's also a single issue from 1888 that is available at the library in paper form only. It was probably acquired after the microfilming project that was later used to digitize the rest of the papers. You can also see a note when there are missing issues. The second list shows the same papers but is arranged by the time covered. In this case, the Plainfield Union is the first on the list because our earliest issue is from 1837. The third and final list identifies the gaps in our newspaper coverage at this time to make it clear which dates we do not have newspapers for. The Civil War years are a significant gap for us. Let's return to the Collections Index page and this time click on the right-hand icon which says Remote. The system does not ask for a library card number because access is free to everyone. These are our digitized periodicals available through DigiFind It. Searching all the periodicals except the daily press at one time is an option, but I don't recommend it because it can get confusing. It's easier to keep track of your searches if you take them one paper at a time. Let's read through the list of available papers. You'll see that the one on top again is the Central New Jersey Times, and the one beneath it, the Constitutionalist, has a lot of overlap. It was also a weekly paper. The Mid-State Press underneath it ran for only a very short time, so that's all we have. The North Plainfield Weekly Review was beneath that. It was also published only briefly, but we have a lot more of it. The Plainfield Courier is the only paper that's still being published today as the Courier News. These are its earliest years, 1891 through 1894. We'll talk later about the rest of that newspaper and how it's available. The next is my favorite, the Daily Press, later called the Plainfield Daily Press. It covers a very nice span of years, and it's also legible in most cases. Following that is the Evening News, which is also valuable, and then the Plainfield Gazette, which is the second earliest paper that we have. We can find some disappointment using the earliest papers because they don't give as much local coverage as we would like. Next is the Plainfield Record. That was also a weekly paper and is a nice one to have. The Plainfield Union, again, is the earliest paper. Next comes the Suburbanite, which was actually a magazine and not published in Plainfield. It was issued by the railway line that ran through Plainfield and has a lot of nice Plainfield coverage. Finally, The Voice is our most recently published paper. You see that's from 1972 through 74 on our website and is very good to have. Now, again, the Daily Press is my favorite. It was a daily paper that was issued by the same company that issued the Constitutionalist as a weekly paper. So the articles between them during the overlapping dates are identical. But we're going to click on the Daily Press as my favorite. This chart shows the years we have, and we can click on any year to say the days. When we click on a specific date, we can open that issue of the paper. The most common target in newspaper research is an obituary, so let's begin with a case in which we know the date of death. The wife of Edward Hillman, who died on February 24th, 1900. We happen to know that her name was Abigail. During this early period, she might be listed only as Mrs. Edward Hillman, so we would look for both versions of her name. Returning to the Daily Press page, there's a way to have the computer search for a name below or on the advanced search page, but that search won't work in this case, so it's lucky that we have an exact date of death and can look directly in the newspaper for ourselves by browsing for it. We do that by clicking on the year we want and then the day. We'll start at Saturday, February 24th, 1900, because we always start an obituary search on day of death, because publication of obituaries used to be very quick in general. We don't know the time of day that she died, so we don't know if there was time to get the obituary published on that same day. Here's that issue. There are 8 pages to check, but not all are local news pages. Unfortunately, the obituary is not to be found here. However, there is something for us to look at while we're here. Note the Walker wedding anniversary in the middle of the page and magnified. It's an example of other valuable coverage to be found. The local papers are very bad for birth announcements, but great for anniversaries. There has been at least one case in which a wedding couldn't be confirmed because of the absence of civil and religious records, but a wedding anniversary was found in one of our papers that gave the date of the marriage. It wasn't proof, but it was helpful. Because there are no Sunday editions for the daily press, and those and holidays are the blank spaces you may have noticed on this calendar chart, let's move on to Monday, February 26th, where we'll find the obituary on the front page. Not all of our obituaries are this long. In this case, we're lucky, and there are even two more paragraphs that we won't look at now. Let's look at her name. This is why we couldn't use the computer to make a successful search. A search for her name as Mrs. Edward Hillman is unsuccessful because we didn't know to include the middle initial J, and a search for Mrs. Hillman could be too broad with too many hits to wade through. A search using Abigail Hillman also fails because the name doesn't appear that way at any point in the obituary. We'll talk later about why using wildcards also wouldn't work here. What we learned from this obituary: her husband's middle initial, which could help us find further articles, and a street address, but no first name or maiden name. We see that her husband is deceased, but no date is given for his death. Now, how old was she? We don't know from this obituary. In 80th year, when done correctly, means she was 79, but even our early papers, when you might think this style of speaking would be more common, sometimes make the mistake of writing the age as the year. And we don't know if the writer was told the correct age by her family either. Now, are we done here? No. We want to look further in this same issue. There's a death notice for Mrs. Edward Hillman on page 8. It gives her first name, a middle initial, and burial place, none of which were found in the actual obituary. This death notice was also not possible to find with the name search we would have tried. Look at the way her name appears to see why. While we're here, let's look at how to magnify and print what we found. When we move our cursor to the lower part of the image, this black box of options appears. It wasn't visible in the other screenshots and isn't visible until your cursor gets close to this spot. We can click on the plus sign to increase the size of the image until it reaches a magnification we're comfortable with, as I've already done here, and we can click on the printer icon to make a print. After we click on the printer icon, this dialog box opens. Under More Options, you can choose this view and then Fit. Experiment with the options and see what works best for you. The image that you would get in your print shows in the right-hand box. Even after printing the death notice, we're still not done with our search for newspaper coverage of the death of Abigail Hillman. We would always search for an account of the funeral. They aren't always available, but we would look forward through the next couple of days. In this case, we would not be successful in finding an account of the funeral in the daily press. But we would want to additionally check any other newspaper available for the time. The search of an additional paper is worthwhile because only in one case I can remember in years of working with these newspapers was the obituary identical in the two papers. Of course, that doesn't apply to the Daily Press and the Constitutionalist. If you remember, they were published by the same people. In this case, a second paper is the Plainfield Courier-News. The chart we looked at the beginning of this webinar tells us so if we look for newspaper coverage of February 1900. We won't search for it in this webinar because only the earliest years of that paper are available through DigiFind It. That doesn't include 1900, but we have it available to us through ProQuest historical newspapers and on microfilm, where we've made this scan for the purpose of the program. The Plainfield Courier-News obituary repeats the same details, adding that she was a native of New York and that when married, the couple first lived in Plainfield, then moved to New York before returning here. The only contradiction in facts presented is the claim that the old Hillman family farmhouse is now being used as a barn. The Daily Press says it's still being used as a dwelling. The Courier also provides us with a brief account of the funeral in a separate article not found in the Daily Press. This appeared on the 28th and does not add any significant details, so we won't look at it now. They usually don't, but are worth checking just in case. It might just as easily have been that an account of the funeral was found in the daily press and not in the Courier. Neither paper is noticeably better at having them. Next, a case in which we don't know the date of death and use DigiFindIt's advanced search to find the obituary. We'll go there now by choosing the daily press again and then clicking on the advanced search option. We have another woman's obituary to search for. Someone we'll discover died just 15 years later than Abigail Hillman, although we don't know that yet. Here we can search all dates or limit by decade or year. By clicking on a decade, we open up the individual years and could choose one of them if we wanted. Our target is Mary Jane Seeds, an unfortunate name for us since the last name is also a common word, but there's no way to limit our search to names only. If we were dealing with a name unusual in this area, like Weltner, for example, it would be smart to start with just that last name, no first name, because there's less opportunity for the computer to misread a single last name than a full name. If that didn't work and we had an unusual first name, we might search only by first name. But since in the single year she died, a year we don't even know yet, the word seeds gives us 44 hits, and that could be even worse in other cases, we're fortunate to know the full name and be able to search for the whole name within quotation marks. We'll choose the 1910s as a decade in this case because of what we've learned from earlier census research. A search for Mary Jane Seeds in quotation marks makes sure that the computer searches for that exact wording and not just the separate words that might be found in the names of a couple of people. We get just one hit. And look at the crazy misinterpretation of words. Do you see on the left there someone who's probably named John and who's probably a chauffeur of Long Island? Fortunately, we're not looking for him today, and Mary Jane Seeds had her name appear in the headline very clearly, so the computer has recognized Miss Mary Jane Seeds passes away. Clicking on the date takes you to a page that looks something like this. I've cropped away the top and right edges. Sometimes a search of the issue of the newspaper that has your hit, which is over on the left, is slow. Ignore the message of 0 hits, which they show as 0 documents with 0 instances. Watch the searching page bar, and if it doesn't move and the search seems to be locked up, stop it, and it will give you a chance to type in your name again for a fresh start. In this example, you can see that the obituary we want is already showing below. We could click on that and be taken to see it on page 1. If it had been on the last page of that issue of the newspaper, it wouldn't be showing yet in our results, and we might think it wasn't there. To get a better look, we'll want to magnify the image. Magnification of browsing issues is different than magnification of search hits, depending on how your computer is set up. Now we're using a drop-down menu on the top to access that function. In this example, the obituary is appearing on the same day she died. If we'd started our search in the next issue of the paper, we would have missed her obituary entirely, possibly thinking the funeral account on Tuesday, March 2nd, on page 1 was all there was. Let's review the kinds of routine details that are commonly given. Address and the main survivor. If we can't find someone's obituary using a date or a search for their name, but we do know these things, we could search by an address found in the city directory or the name of a survivor. We won't look at the death notice now for Mary Jane Seeds. It's on page 11 of this same issue. It tells us her address and burial place, but we learned that in the obituary. Now, this account of the funeral that we might have found on March 2nd and took for her obituary is worth seeing because it names pallbearers. Some of them may be relatives, or in another situation, we might use the names we found here for fan club research for family, associates, and neighbors. We don't need to now. We'll return to the newspapers page to take a quick look at an earlier newspaper, like the Central New Jersey Times of February 29, 1872. In these earlier papers, we're likely to find few actual obituaries. More often, there's only a death notice during these early years. And in this case, the image is terrible. Not an unusual situation for the older newspapers. We have to guess at the names here. Could the first name be Restor? The second person's name starts with a W, but these are awful. If we hope that we have a match for our Walker ancestor because we came looking for her with previous information like date of death, we certainly can't say with any assurance that we found her here. In some situations, you can be fooled by what you want to see. I have been. And the computer absolutely will not be able to find this death notice in a computer search. If you think you've found what you want here, but the image is not clear enough, contact the library. We have microfilm reels, which are often a bit more clear and can make a digital copy from that microfilm for you if they are. The improvement may be limited, but it's worth trying. And here is Susan Walker as the second name, with details that may be of value to us. This is a random example. If we were more interested in one of the names toward the bottom, we could have lightened the overall image to favor that area. It's worth emphasizing that we would never want to rely on a computer search alone to determine whether a newspaper item we want is available. Your eyes can recognize a lot of things that the computer can't. It's always worth a try to look for yourself in the browse function if the time frame is not too broad. Here's an unsuccessful search for Mary Emma Seaman. We've already made our search, and here's a message telling us that the name was not found in the entire collection of the Daily Press. But our browse back through the Daily Press, February 27, 1915, shows Mary Emma Seaman on the same page as Mary Jane Seeds, clear enough for us to recognize. Maybe you noticed her when we were on that page before. If we'd relied on the computer search alone, we would have missed out on this obituary completely. If we weren't able to browse because we just couldn't narrow down the likely time period, we would still be able to make a computer search by one of our two routine obituary details, address or name of survivor. I chose the name of her daughter, and that would have been enough to find Mrs. Seaman's obituary. Even where the computer couldn't read the mother's name and I didn't know her date of death. To be fair, though, searching by her address was a failure. The search for Brook Farm gave 153 hits. Wildcard searches use a symbol to replace a letter or letters that you might not know or that might be commonly misspelled. An asterisk replacing multiple characters and question mark for a single character can be used with Did She Find It, but they don't work easily with people's names because they can't be used within quotation marks here. For a name like Edward with a W or Edward with a U, as long as it isn't within quotation marks with the last name, using a wildcard could be useful. Searching for the name Abigail Hillman with an asterisk within the name to indicate an unknown middle initial or middle name doesn't work. The quotation marks cause the computer to search for the exact characters used instead of recognizing them as wildcards. Unfortunately, searching for the phrase without quotation marks also doesn't work in this case. In some situations, our search for an obituary will be unsuccessful. The middle initial of the Civil War veteran, or unfortunate microfilm scratches like the ones in this example from 1916, might make an obituary unfindable. We also might be unable to find it searching with address or survivors. If the computer search has failed and we don't yet know a date of death, there's no need to give up. Our next presentation will consider the list of options we have to find a date of death that we can then use to try again for the obituary. It's called Discover Death Dates in the Plainfield Area, and I hope you'll return for that webinar. Thank you for joining me for today's program. I hope you found it informative. Now to the Q&A. Okay. Any question is welcome, but of course, if you think of a question later or don't have time to ask it now, I hope you'll contact the library through any of the options on the screen. We're happy to take questions by email or phone, and maybe we'll have something to say that can help.